Good morning, all. Uh, I'm Dr. Satish Wal. I'm a consultant neurologist from Reliance Hospital, Koperkane. So today I'm going to have a talk on acute ischemic stroke. So, like in stroke, every 6 seconds, stroke kills someone. Every other second, stroke attacks a person, regardless of her age or gender. And approximately 17 million people experience stroke each year. 6 million of them do not survive. About 33 million people have or had a stroke, when most have a residual disabilities. But however, behind this number are actual real lives. Stroke is the second most common killer amongst all the non-communicable diseases in India. Of this, approximately in a year, 15.4 lakh people are affected by stroke at any time. And of this, 6.3 lakhs people suffer from death because of stroke. This is a Doll's chart which shows that approximately 41% of the people do not survive a stroke. And in addition, approximately 64 lakh people per year have lost their lives due to disability which is caused by stroke. Stroke is defined as a sudden brain damage which can occur either due to lack of a blood flow to the brain, which is caused by clot or rupture of a blood vessel. If it is occurred due to the clot, which is referred to as ischemic stroke, if it occurs due to the bleed, it is called as hemorrhagic stroke. About 88% of the cases of strokes are due to ischemic stroke, while 12% of the cases are due to hemorrhagic stroke. Of these 88% cases, 20% are caused by atherosclerotic or thrombotic disease, 25% cases are caused due to small vessel disease, 20% cases are due to cardioembolic stroke, 30% are due to cryptogenic stroke, and 5% contribute by the other causes. If we come to the risk factors, they are divided into modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. Modifiable risk factors include alcohol intake, cigarette smoking, high blood pressure or uncontrolled hypertension, uncontrolled diabetes, heart disease, atrial fibrillation, and carotid congestion. Coming to non-modifiable risk factors, this include age. It is seen that the risk of a stroke is double after every successive decade after 65 years of age. 3 out of 4 strokes occur in people who are 65 years of age. Coming to gender, there's an increased risk of a stroke in females, probably related to pregnancy, gestational diabetes, oral contraceptive pills, hormone replacement therapy, and smoking. Family history does play an important role in a stroke. In a certain hereditary condition like a CADASIL, there's a higher risk of a patients having a stroke if there's a positive family history. Coming to the race, there's an increased risk of a stroke in African and American tribes, probably due to the increased risk of a hypertension, diabetes, and obesity. When we come to the stroke treatment, there are barriers to the stroke treatment. The most common being the reach, probably because of the traffic jams or the poor road connections to the hospitals. Non-availability of the 24/7 diagnostic services. Lack of experienced thrombolysis, and there's a lack of awareness and the lack of time for the treatment. So there's a dictum in treatment of stroke that is the time is brain. The thrombolysis window period is about 4.5 years. Why time is brain? Because every minute, every second counts in treatment of stroke. Like in the initial stages, there's excitotoxicity, which lead to the peri-infarct depolarization. And if the time lapses, which will lead to further inflammation and apoptosis. There's a table which shows what damage can be caused every minute and every second. Highlighting on this, like in every minute, the time is wasted in the management of stroke. About 1.9 million neurons are lost every minute. And approximately, we increase or accelerate the aging of the person by 3.6 years if we lose out every hour. Now, when a stroke happens, it's not like that all the tissues damage at a first go. It's like it has 3 regions. The blue region indicates an ischemic core, the green region indicates a penumbra, and the outside region of the light green portion is an oligemic area. The ischemic area is the one which has suffered the most. Penumbra is the one which has suffered a medium damage, and oligemic has the least damage. So why every second counts? Like in this chart, if it's in this table, if you see, there's a red zone and a green zone. The red zone is an ischemic zone, and the green is a penumbra. So our intention of early management of thrombolysis is to save this penumbra region, so that the penumbric region doesn't become an ischemic region. However, if you see this, with every minute, every second, like if you see 6 hours after the stroke onset, this ischemic area goes on increase as well as the penumbric region. And approximately after 24 hours, if we see, this large area has been converted to an ischemic region and the penumbral region is becoming less. So why this every second counts? Like say if we take out time duration, if we treat this patient, there's an entity called as NNT, that is a number need to treat. What does it mean? That for how many people we need to administer a medication so as to get an effect in one patient. So if we treat this patient in less than 90 minutes, the number needed to treat on NNT is 4 to 5. However, by 1.5 hours to 3 hours, this NNT goes to 9, and between 3 to 4.5 hours, this NNT goes to 14. That means the response to the medication or the treatment becomes detrimental. So how do we manage the stroke and thrombolysis? So whenever a stroke patient steps in our emergency department, it is being taken care by stroke physicians as well as by emergency nurses. How do we divide our work? The stroke physician is mainly concerned with the medical history, basic examination, and we go for a short neurological examination, which we do on the basis of NIHSS. NIHSS is a basically 11-point scale, which has a score of 42. Now we have an handy apps which are available for assess the NIHS and which saves our time for the neurological examination. Emergency nurses are mainly dealing with the vital signs, checking the saturation, temperature of the patient, collect the blood to assess the basic investigations like glucose, INR, to get an IV access, send the CBC, electrolytes, and then to proceed for the thrombolysis. Once this initial assessment is done, the patient is sent for the CT scan or neuroimaging. And once the CT is available, and once we rule out a hemorrhage, we proceed for the thrombolysis. Ideally, thrombolysis has to be scanned in the CT scan room itself. Now, when we select a patient for thrombolysis, there are 4 basic steps. First is diagnosis. We need to be very certain that the patient is suffering from stroke. Then we have to assess the severity. I'll talk about how do we assess the severity. Once the severity is assessed, we do a CT scan to rule out a bleed. And then 4th step is we have to rule out the contraindications for thrombolysis. So how do we diagnose? Clinical history is at most very important in identifying the diagnosis. Clinical recognition is based upon clinical history and examination, and then to assess this patient and then send the patient for neuroimaging. How could I assess clinically? Like it's very simple for even general practitioners. There's a mnemonic you should remember is FAST. What is FAST? F stands for face drooping. You should ask the patient to show his teeth or smile. If you see any asymmetry in the face or when the angle of corner of mouth moves to the one side, it suggests there's a facial palsy is there. A stands for arm weakness. There can be patients who don't have a very evident weakness. In that case, we can ask the patients to put their hands out or outstretch the hand as seen in a diagram and ask them to hold for 10 seconds. The patient who has a weakness, they will show a droop on the one side. And this is one of the single bedside tests which help to assess the early weakness or subtle weakness. S stands for speech difficulty. Ask the patient to have a tongue twisters like Lala Lajpat Rai or Muzaffarabad for Indian slangs. If the patient is not able to pronounce it clearly or there is slurring, it usually suggests there's a dysarthria or slurring of speech. Once you assess this, then it's the time to call for an emergency. You have to call 108 or the emergency ambulance to ship the patient to a hospital. However, now recently this FAST has been converted to BFAST because the posterior circulation stroke parameters has been added. So we have to assess those patients who have sudden loss of a balance or those who complain of sudden headache or dizziness. Also, we should ask for the loss of vision or any blurring of vision or visual disturbances in this patient, along with this 4 components of face, arm, speech, and tap. However, whenever the patient has this problem, we should rule out there are mimickers of stroke, which can appear like a stroke, but they're not actually stroke. The most commonest we encounter in our clinical practice is hypoglycemia. Second one being a Bell's palsy, which we commonly seen as a spatial nerve palsy isolated, and metabolic disorders like a hyponatremia. Other stroke mimickers include cerebral infection like abscess, brain tumors, epidural hematoma, migraine, seizure, and the post-seizure weakness called as Todd's palsy or the drug overdosage. And the less common ones being alcohol intoxication or hypertensive encephalopathy, which can lead to a focal weakness. Once we rule out these stroke mimickers, we proceed for the certain blood test. The most necessary one being the blood glucose. We have to rule out a hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, and also send a PT, APTT, INR, especially in those patients who are on anticoagulation. CBC has to be sent, especially for the platelet count, we need to monitor these patients. Troponin assessment need to be done in those cases who has a history of cardiac illness or associated chest pain with the stroke. ECG to be done, but we should not unnecessarily waste the time doing the ECG. But yes, if feasible, need to be done. And Doppler echo not very necessary, but in certain cases we can do it. So coming to history, what are the key components? The very important one being the onset of symptom. Like there are certain cases, like when the history will be very evident, relatives will be in a state to tell, okay, they've seen the stroke happening at this particular time. But then there are times when we see most of the patients who wake up in the morning and those who have a stroke at them. In such cases, it is not a time when the patient woke up. It is when the patient was last seen normal is the onset we usually consider. Ask for any recent events like history of stroke, myocardial infarction, trauma, surgery, or history of bleeding need to be asked. And inquire about the comorbid conditions like hypertension, diabetes, and use of a medication like those patients who are on anticoagulation, insulin, or any patients who are on antihypertensive medications. Now coming to stroke severity, clinically we assess the stroke severity based on NIHS score. As I told, the apps which are available or the PDFs are easily available. The score ranges from 0 to 42, with the 0 being a no stroke symptom, 1 to 4 being a minor stroke, 5 to 15 being a moderate stroke, 16 to 20 being a moderate to severe, and 21 to 42 being a severe stroke. On the basis of CT scan, we can assess it by aspect score. Aspect score is a CT-based score in which, if you can see on the left side, the score of 10, we divide the brain regions in the ganglionic and supraganglionic level. Like C stands for caudate, I stands for internal capsule, L for I for insula, M1, M2, M3, M4, M5, M6. So what we do basically out of these 10 regions, wherever we see a hypodensity, we subtract 1. So, and this is how we take out aspect score. It is seen that smaller the size of infarct, better is the effect of the thrombolysis. So those patients who have score of more than 7 are more likely to be benefited, and those patients who have score less than 5, less likely to benefited with the higher risk of hemorrhage seen in these patients. Now, suppose if you assess the NIHS score and you confirm that the ischemic stroke, there are certain contraindications for RTPA. This includes those patients who have a minor stroke or those patients whose symptoms are rapidly improving before starting of the infusion. Also, those patients who have a severe stroke based on NIHS more than 25 or by an appropriate imaging technique, in such cases, the risk of hemorrhage will be higher. Coming to radio diagnosis, imaging is must prior to thrombolysis so as to rule out a hemorrhage. A simple CT scan or MRI can be done to rule out a ICH. CT scan will show an hypodensity or MRI will show an hyperintensity. Remember that a normal CT does not rule out a stroke. It just rules out that there is no active hemorrhage and then we can proceed for a thrombolysis. This is a class 1 evidence. So this is a normal CT. This is a CT scan seen. On the left side, we can see a normal scan. On the right, we can see there's a hyperdensity. This white thing which is seen is a hemorrhage. In such cases, thrombolysis is contraindicated. Coming to IV thrombolysis, what are the inclusion criteria? Say you have confirmed your diagnosis, now plan for thrombolysis. So inclusion criteria is those patients who have a symptom onset within 4.5 hours. Initially it was 3 hours, but it has been extended to 4.5 hours. Confirmation of diagnosis of ischemic stroke with a measurable neurological deficit. Those patients who are more than 18 years of age, and definitely with the patients having a positive consent for the thrombolysis. Now coming to certain exclusion criteria, this include those patients who have a higher BP. This is a relative contraindication, that is systolic BP more than 185 or diastolic BP more than 110. In such cases, BP need to be controlled and then need to proceed for thrombolysis. Those patients having hypoglycemia, that is blood glucose less than 50. Those patients who had arterial puncture at a non-compressible site in the previous 7 days, say in a carotid artery puncture. Those patients who have active internal bleeding, active bleeding diathesis, like those patients who have platelet less than 1 lakh. Those patients who have received heparin within 48 hours. So in such cases, APTT has to be sent. Need to confirm the APTT. If it is less than 1.7, we can proceed for thrombolysis. Current use of anticoagulation and those patients who are on newer anticoagulation. Those patients who have a history of head trauma or a ischemic stroke in the previous 3 months or history of intracranial hemorrhage prior any time in the past. Those patients have a symptom which is suggestive of subarachnoid hemorrhage, like a thunderclamp, headache. Those patients having intracranial neoplasms, AV malformations, aneurysm, instead of intracranial and intraspinal surgery, or when the CT shows a larger infarct or more than 1/3 territory of the brain is involved. When we come for the dosing of altiplase, then usually it is recommended in dose of 0.9 mg per kg. but not to exceed 90 mg in any patient. Of this 0.9 mg per kg, 10% of this is given as a bolus over 1 minute, and the remaining 90% is giving IV over 60 minutes. So say we take a case of a patient having a weight of 60 kg. He will require a dosage of 54 milligram. In such case, 5.4 mg will be given as a bolus, and 48.6 mg will be given as an infusion over 1 hour. This is a chart showing altiplase administration. Altiplase is the most commonly used. So it has two vials, one which has a powder of the altiplase and the other has a diluent. So we have to mix this two diluent, shake it basically in between the two hands, reconstitute the solution. 10% has to be drawn for the bolus dose, and rest 90% has to be given in a syringe pump so as to deliver over 1 hour. This is a Dawes chart which showed the results of thrombolysis in acute ischemic stroke. As I told, time is brain. So the earlier the thrombolysis, earlier is the benefit. This green dots, they're seen those patients who achieved a functional independence. The red one shows those patients who have suffered or have deteriorated, and the white one has shown those patients who have survived but has some functional deficit. So whenever the patient steps in an emergency department, this DTN, that is the door to needle time, is supposed to be less than 60 minutes. That is, how do we divide the time? At 0 minutes, the patient arrives at a stroke unit. Within less than 10 minutes, we assess the patient and send his blood samples for the evaluation. Within less than 15 minutes, his stroke team has to be notified. Detailed neurological examination has to be done. Within less than 25 minutes, his scan has to be obtained. Within less than 45 minutes, the CT and the lab reports are interpreted. And within 60 minutes, TPA has to be initiated. But there are certain factors which can delay this door to needle time. This can be certain patient-related factors like uncertainty about the symptom onset, unknown medical history, those patients who have a higher BP or uncontrolled BP, those who have a fluctuating neurological deficit, or those patients who are on certain treatment prior to this thrombolysis, or uncertainty about the anticoagulation status. There can be certain logistic factors. This include incorrect triaging of the patient, insufficient personnel, difficulty in drip or urinary catheter insertion, difficulty while weighing the patients, difficulty getting a scan, technical problem, lab results delay, or if the medicine is not available, or the patients are not willing for the consent. So what are the 10 best key practices is, we have to pre-notify the hospital whenever we are shifting a patient to an EMS for the thrombolysis or an acute stroke. Need to be rapid triaging of the patient, and stroke team has to be notified on time. Single call at the paging system to activate the entire stroke team, using of a stroke tool, rapid acquisition and interpretation of this brain imaging, rapid blood test, pre-mixing of the medication, rapid access to the altiplase in emergency department, and there should be team-based approach, and then a rapid data feedback has to be given so that we can curtail this door to needle time in a future cases. Out of all these 10 strategies which are described, the first two, that is appropriate triaging in emergency department and pre-notification to the hospital where you're shifting, we can reduce this DTN time from 5% to 27%, which is a quite significant amount of time we'll be saving. So once we thrombolyze this patient, coming to the post-thrombolysis management, the major focus in this phase is on reducing the risk of mortality by focusing on respiratory and cardiac complication, as well as preventing the recurrent stroke. So this can be achieved by continuous cardiac monitoring, and then a simplified stroke unit protocol in which we monitor the sugar, fever, and swelling so as to identify and treat respiratory disease and sepsis. Intensive screening for the cause of stroke has to be done, followed by strategies so as to prevent the recurrent stroke. So what do we do while monitoring the administration of the TPA? We monitor these patients in ICU or stroke unit. If the patient during the thrombolysis develops a headache, acute hypertension, nausea, or vomiting, we discontinue the infusion and get an immediate scan. BP and neurological assessment is to be done every 15 minutes for the next 2 hours, every 30 minutes for next 6 hours, and every hour until 25 hours after the treatment. Say the patient's BP is more than 185 or more than 110 diastolic. In this case, antihypertensive medications are given prior to administration of altiplase. We delay the nasogastric tube insertion or intervening bladder catheterization or intra-arterial pressure catheters. We need to obtain a repeat follow-up CT scan at 24 hours before starting anticoagulation or antiplatelet agents. Now, there are certain complications which we routinely deal with. The first one being a pressure ulcers. This can be done by using of support surfaces, frequent repositioning, using of an airbeds or waterbed, optimizing the nutritional status, and moisturizing the sacral skin are the preventive treatment strategies. Coming to seizures, seizures are uncommon in an acute stroke, so prophylactic anticonvulsant medications are not beneficial or usually to be avoided. Certain patients can be agitated or become aggressive. In that cases, causal treatment must be preceded any type of sedation or antipsychotic treatment. Coming to dysphagia and feeding, dysphagia occurs in about 50% of the patients with unilateral hemiplegic strokes, and this is an independent risk factor for the poor outcome. In such patients who are having a continuous dysphagia, options for enteral nutrition like a RT insertion or a percutaneous gastrostomy feeding has to be done. However, it should be remembered that a PEG does not provide a better nutritional status or an improved clinical outcome as compared to Ryle's tube. So any of them should be better. Coming to aspiration and pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia is one of the very important complications in patients with acute stroke. So preventive strategies are withhold oral feeds in the patient, those who have a impaired swallowing, insert a nasogastric tube or a percutaneous gastrostomy feeding, and frequent change of the patient's position in bed, and pulmonary physical therapy has to be done. Remember, prophylactic antibiotic administration is no superior to the optimal care in such cases. Coming to DVT and pulmonary embolism, risk might be reduced by the early mobilization and the good hydration of this patient. Low dose heparin, low molecular weight heparin reduces the incidence of both DVT and pulmonary embolism without significantly increasing the risk of a ICH. Falls. This is the most common and the most dreaded complication which we don't expect in our patients. So this can occur at any stage of the stroke, and this risk factors include cognitive impairment, depression because of multiple medications, and sensory impairment. So a multidisciplinary package which focuses on personal and environmental factors need to be preventive. Exercise, calcium supplements, and biphosphonates can improve the bone strength and decrease the fracture rates in stroke patients. So coming to a stroke unit, a stroke optimally stroke team which we usually have, it usually consists of an emergency physician, a stroke nurse, a neurologist, neuroradiologist, neurosurgeon, and a stroke unit or a center director who has an experienced physician. All staff members should have ongoing treatment in stroke management and a certified medical education at least once a year, which is readily available online. So how does a stroke unit works basically? So we proceed from a neurological assessment and a medical assessment, proceed for scan, early assessment of nursing and therapy needs, followed by early mobilization of the treatment, preventive treatments like a prevention of pressure sores, careful positioning, handling of the patient, avoiding hypoglycemia, pyrexia, or hydration, and followed by early mobilization by a coordinated multidisciplinary team, which includes physiotherapist, occupational therapist, and early assessment for the needs after the discharge. So by this, the stroke team can convert this chaos into a particular order. This is the stroke sheet which we usually maintain for our patients in ICU. So to summarize, the stroke treatment is time dependent. As I say, time is brain. Thrombolysis window period is 4.5 hours. The recommended door to needle time is 60 minutes. Teamwork is of utmost importance. Altiplase dose is 0.9 mg per kg body weight, maximum 90 milligrams. Of this, 10% is to be given bolus and rest 90% as infusion over next 60 minutes. Remember, stroke is an emergency. We need to act fast and time is brain. At the end, I'd like to say every stroke receiving hospital has its own unique set of blocks, which even a thrombolytic cannot realize. However, overcoming this are imperative to achieve the status of stroke ready hospital, which we at Reliance do have. Thank you.